Okay, Nate? Now, after our discussion of last week on Thursday, I asked you guys to watch the 2 episodes of the Spygate by the Epoch Times. The first one 35 minutes long, the second one 45 minutes long. They've apparently put them together on the internet now so that they're all one big long piece. Now, can you raise your hand if you've seen it now, by now? Okay, good. So that's one of the big main things that has happened here. You guys have gotten a chance to take a look at that thing. Now, you know that last week, the United States Senate, under Republican control, called William Barr before them and basically insisted that William Barr investigate how this hoax of an investigation about theoretical collusion between Trump and his campaign and Russia, how this investigation got started in light of their assertion that there was no evidence to support the existence of any collusion at all. How could this have happened? And you know that the assertion is being made by Trump that as long as there was no collusion and there was no underlying crime, therefore, this theory of him obstructing justice is equally invalid, and that anything that he was doing was motivated by something other than obstructing justice, because Trump would have known at all times that he had not done anything that had to do with collusion. And so therefore, there was no justification for this investigation, and therefore his taking steps to give instructions to Sessions to not recuse himself, to give any instructions to McGahn to get rid of the special prosecutor, or any of the other things that he was doing, couldn't have been really motivated by a corrupt motive to obstruct the investigation of a legitimate crime of some sort. So that event has taken place, and as you may have seen now, 459 and counting United States attorneys and federal prosecutors have now signed a public statement saying that they believe that the evidence set forth in volume 2 of Mueller's report relating the obstruction of justice events make it clear that there is a basis for indicting Trump, but for the White House Office of Legal Counsel's opinion that one could not, as an employee of the Justice Department, bring an indictment against a sitting president. So that there's 459 and counting federal prosecutors asserting that the evidence in volume 2 shows an obstruction of justice on the part of Trump. And you've now seen this major narrative that has been produced by this group called Epoch Times. Epoch Times has put forth this 2-part news program, a news kind of program, with videotape and photographs and everything supporting what it is that they're saying. So what I'd like to do is today I would like to be discussing the summaries. Now, how many of you have gotten a chance to read the summaries of both volumes? I don't want to call on you if you haven't done it. Did you get to read them? Okay. You guys over here got to read some of them? Okay. So, but the reason I keep asking you to do these things is because it then makes it easier to talk with you about them and to get your ideas about them. And as I've said, that your generation is sort of right in the crosshairs here of the consequences of global climate change. And, we're getting more and more representatives being elected, both in the House of Representatives and in other legislative bodies throughout the country from your generation to be able to get inside the fight. But there is this need to familiarize yourself with what the issues are that are both at stake here and that are at issue. And so that what I want to do is today, what I want to do is from those of you who have now seen the documentary Spygate, I want to ask you some of the questions. What is it that you think they were saying? It's pretty dense, as you probably noted. But what do you think the basic point is that they're making in that whole narrative?
That the executive body was compromised with the election document. That was the tone that we were about when you're talking about Obama's efforts as well. It seems that we're very much trying to get rid of it and prevent it from happening.
To prevent
Donald Trump from entering office.
and holding and staying in office.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Now, what do you think they were saying the motive was for them trying to get rid of Trump?
To sort of retain their own independent power and controlling who's part of the executive.
Well, I mean, that would be true of any president, right? I mean, that any president who came in was not therefore part of the executive branch as a rule. So what do you think it was that they're trying to say was the motive of them? What did Trump represent? That the executive branch people, FBI, CIA, NSA, State Department, why were they trying to get rid of it?
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure if this is answered
Yeah.
before, but I remember them saying that Trump couldn't be bought.
Yeah, they did say that.
He was like a kind of a wild card where he basically act on his own intentions without other influences.
Okay. Right. Okay. And who did they say was the principal person who was running this operation against Trump? Do you remember?
Running, right?
Yeah, right. Right. Jack Brennan, the head of the director of the Central Intelligence Agency under Obama. It was he who initiated this. And what did they say? What did they say about the role that was played by the Steele dossier in initiating this major investigation against Trump? Okay. Okay. What did they say? You don't remember what? Does anybody remember what they were saying the role of the dossier was? Okay. Coming on over here.
It was like the essential piece of the whole thing. Brought by the State Department to the United States, the FBI, and dispersed in a series of memos. And then the origin of the dossier is kind of a little bit shaky on it, but it seems like a private firm funded Christopher Steele to go and get this information, which I don't think was only exclusively directed at Trump, but I think kind of like a broader investigative thing in terms of Russian intelligence work. But basically that document is the basis for the FBI and NSA's investigation initially. It also connects to Ross Smith, I think, the Carter Page aspect.
Yeah. That's what it was. They said that Jack Brennan began this investigation because there was a dossier prepared by this fellow Steele, who is a member of the MI5 in the UK, is a long-time investigative agent for the British intelligence. And he put together this dossier, which he then provided to the FBI, and the FBI provided it to the CIA. And the CIA, Brendan then actually gave a copy of this to John McCain. Well, he gave it to John Kerry too. He gave it to John McCain, the Republican. And so that this is what they're saying began the investigation. And so what they do is they turn to the dossier and they start attacking the dossier and actually characterized it as being in collusion with foreign powers. And those foreign powers were Australia and the UK, longtime allies of the United States, and allies of our intelligence services. And so that they spun this narrative in which they're actually charging the Obama administration and the Hillary Clinton campaign in the Democratic National Committee with colluding with foreign powers to try to intervene and influence the 2016 presidential election. Now, if that sounds like a familiar charge, this is because you will discover in your years of practice as you move out into the world that this is the thing that the hardcore right wing tends to do all the time. That what it does is it's one of these things like I'm rubber and you're glue, and anything you say bounces off me and sticks to you kind of thing. It's a really adult philosophy that usually comes from the sandbox in about the third grade or so. It's just second only to social man. And so that what we're really looking at here is this extraordinarily sophisticated program of trying to capitalize on whatever success the investigation of Trump has had in communicating to average Americans that there's a problem here because foreign powers may be attempting to engage in influencing our elections. And if in fact the opponents of Trump have been successful in getting that message through to large groups of people, only they can't quite get clear about exactly who it is that was doing this or who was benefiting from it, then what they've done is they basically captured some of that ire on the part of the American people, and they're now turning it onto the investigators themselves, who were accusing Trump of doing exactly that. And so that what we see now is that there are two things going on right now, two major things going on. Number one, there is this aggressive, sophisticated narrative being generated, asserting that the investigation by the special prosecutor and by the Congress, the Democrats in the Congress, of Donald Trump was all a hoax, and that there was no involvement on the part of Donald Trump or his campaign in actually colluding with the Russians. And they're hiding under the assertion in volume 1 of Mueller's report that Mueller actually said that he wasn't investigating collusion, he was investigating potential criminal conspiracy. And in order to have a criminal conspiracy, you have to have a criminal agreement. And he wasn't able to find evidence of any specific agreement on the part of the Trump campaign to ask Russia to interfere in the election, he says. despite certain evidence to the contrary. Yes?
This is somewhat off topic, but not so much. What about the Rico Act and some kind of Rico charges? Would any of that, you think, be possible here in like the broader definitions of those racketeering charges?
Yeah. No, part of the problem with the RICO statute, that's the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organization Act that was drafted by G. Robert Blakey when he was a professor of law from Cornell University. He drafted this statute when he was legal counsel to the Senate Judiciary Committee. And it is a device that has been developed by the Justice Department with the cooperation of the House and Senate passing this law, giving them an additional tool to investigate and prosecute organized crime in the United States. And they drafted this statute which sets forth some 18 or so what they call predicate crimes. That if there are certain particular kinds of crimes that are committed by a group of people, such as witness tampering, witness intimidation, drug smuggling, murder, money laundering, wire fraud. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of criminal actions that organized crime people historically engage in. And what they've done is they've drafted this statute which says that if in fact you can show that there is a group of people gathered together to commit two of these acts in a coordinated way in a 10-year period, that you can in fact attribute those crimes to everybody that's involved in the operation. The challenge to it is that what's happened is almost all of the big law firms now have seized upon this, and they try to use it against their litigation opponents. And so that there's been this untoward effort on the part of lawyers to utilize the RICO statute for all kinds of things that don't really have anything to do with organized crime. And for that reason, the courts have, since it's being used against other corporations, a lot of times now, the corporate lawyers have been appointed to the federal bench, mainly by Republicans, have in fact begun to cut away at the utilization of RICO. And they're trying to hone it all the way down to basically saying that you can only use it against mafia people. That's what they're doing. And so that the attempt to use the RICO statute in this particular case, if you were trying to characterize a presidential campaign on the part of one of the two major political parties as a criminal racketeering enterprise, virtually all the judges would recoil immediately and to throw you out of court. But what we're looking at, as I said, is that there is, one at the same time, two extremely interesting things going on here. There is the mounting of this alternative narrative. It's actually an antithetical narrative. It's completely counter to the thesis that engined the original investigation of Trump and his campaign, that Trump was colluding with Russia to interfere with the campaign and to help Trump win. And so what they've done is they said, no, what you're dealing with is the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee colluding with foreign powers, Australia and the UK, to try to influence the American election. So that there's a completely countervailing narrative that's being pushed right now. And what you see is that the Republican senators, fearing that there's going to be an impeachment of Trump, and bringing that impeachment, those impeachment articles up to the Senate for their trial. What they're doing is they're trying to develop an alternative theory that they can use to counter to the American people during the trial. and that they're going to be constantly insisting that this other thing was going on. And you've seen them start that already. You saw them start that, in the hearings with Barr, and that they've asked Barr to begin an investigation of the investigators. And in fact, he told them he'd already begun that. He doesn't even really need to wait for them to tell him to do it. That he's already started an investigation into how this whole thing started, with his operative assumption that there was no collusion and there was no crime. Not only is he said there was no crime, he's actually gone so far as to say there was no evidence of collusion, which, as you know, isn't true. Yes.
Why do you think they won't subpoena Don McGann since he seems like in the midst of all this?
Well, they will subpoena him. In fact, the enabler from the Judiciary Committee will subpoena him. As you know, Trump has taken the position now that none of the people from the executive branch are going to appear. I mean, he's taking this flat out, screw you attitude toward the Congress. And he's resting it in the fact that all of this has been investigated. And that they're just investigating, they're just using their powers of investigation in the Congress simply to try to destroy him, because Mueller didn't destroy him. And wasn't able to find any evidence of either collusion or obstructing justice, as he keeps saying. So what you're looking at is him just sort of putting out this complete alternative view of reality, which, there are probably 1% of the people in the country are going to read either one of the volumes. And so they're basing everything that they think and believe on what they're being told. And they usually look to the highest level of authority to take their truth from. And so they got the president telling them this, that there's no evidence of collusion, no evidence of obstruction. And so, 33% of the people or so, or maybe even as high as 40% of the people, just use the president as the source of authority, even though he's lied over 10,000 times. Literally, as it turns out. The New York Times has done this in-depth study, and that he's told material lies over 10,000 times now, in just 2 years in office. And so that, on the one hand, one of the things that's going on is the generation of this narrative, and this Epoch Times has in fact sort of occupied the space now. They have laid out this full, consistent narrative, which you see the Republicans now going over and starting to adopt. That's why I wanted you to look at that thing, because even though no human being can really keep up with what they're saying, and as you saw that thing, she was just sitting there pouring it on, one date after another, one meeting after another. But what they were doing extremely effectively is that whatever she was saying, they were putting up photographs and video behind her showing what she was saying. So that you got the impression that whatever it is that she was saying, there's the visual proof of it. You're right in front of your own eyes. Here's the truth of what it is she's saying. And what they were doing, as I said, out of the some 400 or so individual items of fact that are asserted in the whole narrative, probably 350 of them or more are true. And they've got the visual evidence of it right there. But what they're doing is they were leaving out, let me ask you this. What is the one most important thing that you think they left out of the whole narrative? The fact that it was true. That Russia was, in fact, attempting to influence the election. And, in fact, the investigation that was mounted by the CIA, by the Justice Department, everyone else to ascertain what it was Russia was doing, was all completely valid. And yet they never said that once. And they never once admitted that Russia was actually attempting to influence the election. Never once. And they never made any reference whatsoever to any act of coordination, cooperation, solicitation, all of the different kind of things that Mueller actually referenced in volume 1 of what they were doing. And all he said is that he didn't have the kind of evidence that could prove beyond a reasonable doubt the fact that there was a malicious and criminal intent on the part of Trump and the things that he was doing, because he couldn't find any actual agreement between Russia and the Trump campaign. So on the one hand, you're seeing this extraordinary narrative being set forth, offering a nefarious explanation for the investigation, the special prosecutor's appointment, the FBI's investigation, the CIA's investigation, the preparation of the dossier, the Steele dossier. All of this is being asserted to have been not only a hoax, but in fact a plot to actually falsely charge the president with a crime and remove him from office. Okay? And what they're asserting is that in light of the fact that Mueller has said that he has not been able to find proof beyond a reasonable doubt of a particular agreement, they're characterizing that, mischaracterizing that intentionally as no evidence at all of any collusion. Okay? So that whole narrative is being generated. And as I pointed out 2 classes ago, and then repeated again last Thursday, is that what they're doing is they're springboarding from the lack of any criminal conspiracy and to collude or to conspire to affect the election between the campaign and Russia, that they're transforming that into no evidence whatsoever, backing it with this false narrative of what the real motive behind the investigation was. And therefore, what they're doing is they're saying that all that they've got is volume 2. And all there is of any real evidence that was supported by Mueller is obstruction. And they're jumping up and down. Now, all the news media, all the people that were frustrated by Mueller not finding any collusion, what they're doing is they have taken the bait. And they've all dropped any investigation of collusion. And what they're doing is they're turning all of their focus on the obstruction charges and dropping their investigation of collusion, cooperation, coordination, all of that. So what they're doing is they're falling into the trap of not attempting to show that there was an underlying crime committed. And therefore, any kind of accusations about obstruction are just technical. Or they kept referring to it as a process crime. They refused to testify, they refused to turn over documents, they lied about whether they had a certain kind of meeting or something, but none of it goes to the core of what it was that the crime was that they were trying to conceal. And so you've heard it said probably 100 times is, why is it they were doing this? Why were they lying? Why were they concealing this? Why were they trying to obstruct the investigation if there were no crime? And so they keep saying that over and over again. And now what you have is that the former federal prosecutors have not only taken the bait, they've swallowed it. And they've come out now saying that there's 459 of us that are trying to tell you that the evidence that is set forth in volume 2 about the obstruction would in fact support a criminal indictment of the president were it not for the White House opinion, legal opinion, stating that a sitting president cannot be indicted. And so what they're doing right there is they're saying that, look, the federal prosecutors in the executive branch are basically trying to prosecute the president for obstructing their investigation, even though there's no assertion there was any underlying crime. That's what we're looking at here. And what I'm saying is that there is every reason to believe that if in fact the House of Representatives returns an article of impeachment or more than one for obstructing justice without setting forth the existence of an underlying crime, it's going to go up to the Senate, and the Senate is going to take the position that without there being an underlying crime asserted, if you don't have the courage to assert the crime, you aren't going to be able to convict someone of obstructing justice. And that's going to be something that appeals to people generally in the country, because they're saying, what's this all about? You know, are you talking about there being some sort of an authoritarian executive branch that can go around prosecuting people just for not cooperating with them? That's what you got to get here. That's the key to this thing, is that what they're doing is they're appealing to people's libertarian instincts. Not just reactionaries or authoritarians, but libertarians who resent the whole idea of being prosecuted because you wouldn't cooperate with the FBI. I mean, we've all been raised with the belief that if they come to your door and say, here, knock on your door, and you say, no, I don't want to talk to you, and you close the door and you can walk away. But what they're doing is they're trying to establish a regime here where if the FBI comes to talk to you and you don't cooperate with them, what they're going to do is drag you in front of a grand jury. And the grand jury was created to protect people against prosecutors. The whole reason for the common law development of a grand jury is to protect people who are being investigated by the king's prosecutors, and they're trying to keep them from being able to bring them to trial without the prosecutor bringing the evidence to a grand jury and allowing a citizens group of 24 people to decide whether they believe that the evidence that the prosecutor has makes it more reasonable than not to conclude that the person is guilty of a crime. And what you really see happening here now is the federal prosecutors with a special prosecutor, what they're doing is they're using the grand jury as a sword instead of as a shield for the people. And they're using it as an inquisition. And they're dragging the people in front of the grand jury, and they're either going to prosecute them for lying if they tell them something is false, or they're going to prosecute them for contempt if they refuse to answer their questions. And so that what you're seeing here is the proponents of getting rid of Trump are being walked right into a trap. And they're walking right into it, where they're going to be alienating all of the libertarian people in the country, a lot of them, the more clear-thinking civil libertarians, who are going to recoil at this process that's going on here. And they're going to start being able to generate sympathy for the president, especially because they don't have the courage to charge him with another crime, with a substantive underlying crime. And so that they're just relying upon this technical term of you refusing to cooperate, or you're trying to interfere with our election, or interfere with our investigation. And they've even got a crime now, which is comparatively recent, a statute passed for lying to the FBI. If the FBI comes to interrogate you and you say anything to them that is false, you can be prosecuted for that in and of itself. This is bordering on the Inquisition that's happening here. And so the sophisticated thing you need to understand is that what we're seeing happening here is because of this outrageous person in the White House, that our whole system of justice is kind of getting way out over its skis here. And it's starting to do things and utilize methods that are in fact indicative of an authoritarian state. Actually, they're retreating right back into some of the worst historical examples of what was going on in England that caused us to set up the Constitution. They're setting up what is in effect a Star Chamber. A Star Chamber was a tribunal that existed in medieval in England, in which the king or the king's prosecutors would just target an individual, whatever the reasons were that they wanted to get rid of them, and they would just convene a Star Chamber, and then they would just start inquiring into anything that they could find out that that person had ever done wrong. There were no initial criminal acts that caused them to impanel the Star Chamber. They would just go looking for something and anything. And so you see what they're doing is they're going after Trump's income tax, they're going after his business activities, they're going after his sexual activity, they're going after anything they can think of here. And so that what's happening is that to the extent to which our American population has been effectively educated to recoil at that kind of overreaching on the part of an authoritarian government, you're starting to get people to resent this, okay? Because they don't have the courage to charge them with the underlying crime. And so that's the problem that we're having. That's the sophisticated understanding of what the problem is that is here. And so that what you see is not only the statement of these 459 prosecutors jumping up and down on the acts of obstruction. What they've done now, and you're going to see it happen, what they've done now is they've reduced the number of events that they're focusing on from 10 events down to 3. There's only 3 events that these 459 prosecutors have identified as being the events that they think, in their opinion as prosecutors, constitute a criminal act on the part of Trump. Okay, and so now we're seeing this process taking place here, in which it's almost like Neville Chamberlain, you know, the famous backing down constantly in the face of an authoritarian threat like Hitler and the fascists in Europe in the 1930s, is that because they're trying to be reasonable, because they don't have the courage to confront an authoritarian bully like this, they're just backing off into technical charges against him, like obstruction, and then moving from 10 down to 3, and they're still not directed, and they're on the very brink of functionally abandoning all of the information that is in volume 1. An entire 400 pages of evidence showing any reasonable person that there was active collusion going on here between the Trump campaign and Putin and the Russian GRU and all of these individual Russian citizens and the people that were involved not only in his campaign staff, but also in his national security advisory team. You know, they were holding regular meetings with Russians all the time, turning over polling data to them, specifically about Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, the very states that made the difference in the election. All of that's right up in front of everybody right now. And yet they're refusing to do anything about it. Okay? So what I'm saying here is that what I want you to be able to do is to be able to not let yourself get conned by what's going on here. In that, you know, that you as a generation, you need to know that you've got to work harder than you're working here. Okay? You know, I mean, I asked you 3, 4, 5 times to watch this Spygate thing, and you didn't watch it. I asked you over and over again to read the summaries. You don't do it. Well, I'm saying, I'm not chastising you. I'm just trying to suggest that, you know, you're going to have to step up here, you know, or else you're going to be part of the victims of being conned by these people. And the government officials are getting conned now. And I just don't want your generation to get conned. You know, so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to be, in a certain sense, if you will, legal counsel to you guys as a generation. You know, I'm trying to point out to you what's happening here right in front of you. But you know, it's going to require some more work on your part to do this. I don't want to be here 10 years from now saying I told you so, you know, about this. You know, and you guys are seeing, that they've melted the ice caps entirely. They've dug up these 87 billion barrels of oil and burned it into the atmosphere. and have ended up generating, these gigantic methane plumes, because of the melting of the permafrost. And I just want you to pretend you're in a science fiction movie, and all of a sudden, 10 years from now, when you're sitting there, oh gee, I sure wish I had this to do over again, and all of a sudden you find yourself here in this class. Boy, here you are. You're back at this particular time. You have the opportunity in front of you still to do something about this, but it's going to take a little bit harder work than you're used to, So that's why I want you to become familiar with not just the 10 acts of obstruction, not get suckered into just looking at the 3 of them that these 459 U.S. prosecutors have selected out. Don't take the bait. Back up and look at all 10 of these things that have been identified by Mueller in his report, and do not abandon the investigation about the volume 1 of all the stuff that this campaign was doing, all the stuff that Trump was doing. And there are 3, I've set forth there's 3 different potential underlying crimes that you need to keep looking into. And one of them is the actual collusion, coordinating, the cooperation, and the active solicitation on the part of the Trump campaign of assistance from Russia in wiretapping basically the computers of not only Clinton but the Democratic National Committee. That we can't allow them to get away with that. Now, I want to point out there's more information coming down the line. The United States does that all the time. The United States executive branch that is all, whining and wringing their hands about this terrible, awful thing that Russia has done. The United States executive branch, Central Intelligence Agency, NSA, does this all the time. I mean, what do people think Radio Free Europe was? Radio Free Europe just said it was broadcasting into Russia every day, 24 hours a day, just constant propaganda into Russia, trying to talk them into overthrowing their government. All the time. All that's happening now is being done through the internet. The United States sends in full-scale, the United States sent into Nicaragua Roger Ailes to become the campaign chairman for Chamorro, who was running against Danny Ortega and Thomas Borge because they were socialists. Look what they're doing in Venezuela. I mean, they've got Bolton and everybody running around, basically threatening military invasion of Venezuela because they don't like the president down there, because he won't allow the foreign oil corporations from the United States to come in and own their oil. I mean, it's just real obvious what's happening here. Okay, and so that first one that you need to drill down on is to look at this information. Start out with at least the summary, okay, in volume 1, and look through that, and you'll see in volume 1 all kinds of information that Mueller has pointed out, constitute cooperation, coordination, solicitation, all kinds of activity. And I want you to look at the actual thing that he said is that he didn't say that there was no evidence of collusion. He simply said collusion isn't the right word. The right word is conspiracy. But there's all kinds of evidence of conspiracy. All he said was he couldn't with confidence say that the evidence showed a clear agreement between them to do this in a coordinated way. And he says that without that kind of clarity of such an agreement, especially when you're dealing with the President of the United States, if you're going to be making a charge against somebody without an actual formal agreement or some secret meeting somewhere, then if it's the President of the United States, you ought to be much more careful. And he actually went to the extent of saying specifically the same thing he said in volume 2. That the fact of the matter is all of this has to be analyzed and evaluated in light of the White House legal opinion that you can't indict the president while he's in office. And so you have to take that into account.
What's like the legal standard for an agreement though? Can an agreement be inferred just?
Sure can. There's any doubt about that. There's any doubt about that. But you don't see these 459 prosecutors turning and looking at that and saying, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? And somehow you have to have some kind of a formal meeting, like, you know, an Appalachian meeting of the heads of the mafia, you know, that you got wiretapped so you can hear. I mean, that's ridiculous. That's if you don't want to have to do any work at the trial at all. You know, you want to have like a videotape of them signing an agreement. You know, that's preposterous. And yet you don't see any effort being made now on the part of the prosecutors to look back at volume 1 and say how ridiculous that is. Okay, so that's something that you need to do.
We have a few questions. The first one, he says pretty clearly at the end of the summary of volume 2 that the Constitution says the president can be indicted for obstruction of justice and crimes, which contradicts the OLC's judgment that the president would be impaired, would be able to do his job properly.
Mm-hmm.
So why does the president's lawyer's judgment take precedence to the Constitution?
Well, because the problem is it's a formal policy of the Justice Department that they have promulgated internal rules now that if you are an employee of the Justice Department as a prosecutor, you, pursuant to our rules and regulations, are not allowed to indict a sitting president. And they predicate that upon the opinion of the White House Office of Legal Counsel. And the problem is that Mueller is just an employee of the Justice Department. He's not a special prosecutor like Leon Jaworski was or Archibald Cox was. That people are still confused about this. They're still referring to him as a special prosecutor, but he's not. He's just a special hiree of the Justice Department. And so he's subject completely to their rules and regulations. And he is such an institutionalist, this guy Mueller, that he said, look, I need to make it clear. I am just an employee of the Justice Department. I am obliged to abide by their rules. And therefore, in light of that rule, he goes all the way in volume 2 of saying, I can't indict him anyhow. In fact, you notice that what the Republicans are doing now is they're saying, look, if you knew you couldn't indict him to begin with, how could you keep on investigating him? You know, that's actually what they're saying now. Okay?
That's absurd.
It's just the kids that I asked the question. I'll chat with you later, okay? Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't want to get your arm worn out there. Yeah.
My second question would be, as Mueller has come to these conclusions where he says, I cannot fully exonerate, there is evidence, but I'm not going to offer a judgment, then is it now in the hands of the legislative branch exclusively to pursue these? And would they have to then open their own investigations and their own,
Yeah, no, the answer is yes, obviously. Is that there's not any doubt at all when you read through even volume 2, his whole discussion about the limits on his authority as an employee of the Justice Department to bring indictment against the sitting president. He says over and over again, here's all the evidence. Here's all the evidence. I cannot come to an official conclusion because of this White House legal opinion, okay? But and what of course Barr said is that, well, if he can't come to the opinion, then I'll do it, okay? And it's perfectly clear that he didn't line up all this evidence, to allow Barr to make the opinion. In fact, Mueller says so in his letter that he sent to him. He sent the letter to him and said, you're intervening in this process and coming to this conclusion that there was no crime here really undermines the entire purpose of hiring an outside counsel. And he said it just like that. Okay? And so that what's happening here is that because of the, again, lack of courage on the part of the Congress to repass a special prosecutor statute like they had for Watergate, okay? Because of their cowardice, basically, in reinstituting the special prosecutor statute, they've gotten themselves trapped in a situation where any special lawyer who is hired by the Justice Department is unauthorized to bring an indictment against the sitting president. So as long as this situation obtains, any president can get away with anything as long as the Justice Department abides by that one opinion letter of the White House Office of Special Counsel, which was devised to deal with Agnew, with Spiro Agnew, back in 1974. You know, it's an old White House ruling, and what they ended up doing is they were looking at the thing and they said they had in front of them potential charges against Spiro Agnew, which in fact were being promulgated against him only in order to get rid of him, because they wanted to get him out of there so they could bring in Gerald Ford to prepare for pardoning Richard Nixon. When you really understand what was going on there. I mean, the political machination, I do not want you to believe that everything is nothing but political machinations and that there's no underlying legal principles that are actually operative here. I do not want you to despair of being able to go to law school, okay, and learn how to fight back against these people using the rule of law. I want you to be able to understand this, but you have to unpack this. So this old 1974 White House office legal opinion said nothing other than, well, we may well not be able to indict a sitting president by way of dictum, but we can in fact indict a sitting vice president. And therefore, there's an actual threat of prosecuting Spiro Agnew if he doesn't resign. And so what they did is they crafted an entire legal analysis that was designed to get Agnew to resign. And in the process, they did this throwaway line of saying, well, we may not be able to indict the sitting president, but we certainly can indict a sitting vice president, so he'd better quit. And so now they're going back and citing that legal opinion as a legal opinion saying you can't indict a sitting president. And the Justice Department has adopted it as an internal regulation for their employees. And that's all that we're looking at here.
But these are just legal opinions, like they're not precedent, they're not handed down by any sort of judge or anything. It's just some guy sitting in an office saying, I don't think we can do this, or
That's right.
I think we can do that.
That's right. And not only that, but it's just dictum. It's not even the principled decision they were trying to make at the time. They were trying to decide whether they could lawfully indict a sitting vice president. So it was just this kind of throwaway line, and now that's being cited as though it's written in stone somewhere. Okay? But those types of decisions are political in that regard. They're all making political decisions. It's all, as I pointed out right there, what I point out is that since the very beginning, there has been this dance going on between the Hamiltonian kind of mercantilists and financiers and kind of elitists, even unto the point of being kind of authoritarian, of this authoritarian minority being able to govern the whole country and mobilize its resources and all of that, okay? And so this is a dance going on, a political dance going on. And what they're trying to do, when you go to the law schools, they're trying to recruit you to participate in this dance. You know, to not be foolish and naive like regular people, believing that the law is the law, you know, and that you've got to obey it, because regular people need to be instructed that they need to obey the law or they'll go to jail. But all these other people in the upper echelons don't do that to each other. It's all part of this club. And so what they do is they use the legal principles to try to jockey around to get into a political position, is what they're doing here. Yes?
Yeah, I was just wondering what's the legality of Congress appointing special prosecutor reviews? I know it's a little murky.
No, the Congress could pass a statute. The Congress could pass a statute authorizing the appointment of a special prosecutor, but the enforcement of the law is the domain of the executive branch under the Constitution. Under Article 2, the power to enforce federal law resides in the president and in the executive branch. It doesn't reside in the Congress. Congress has no right at all to do this. And this is an underlying challenge here, because the fact of the matter is the Congress of the United States doesn't have the authority to go around investigating crimes. Their job is to pass laws.
Is that what happened in the Watergate scandal with Archibald Cox?
That was impeachment. What they did is they passed a special prosecutor statute that had general application, but it was actually designed to deal with what was going on. And they passed the statute saying that there was a process by means of which a special prosecutor could be appointed. And a special prosecutor could be appointed under that old statute, which is now expired, because as a political matter, they put a sunset clause on it. They didn't want to give the impression that they were just passing a law for just one person to deal with Nixon, so they put just a sunset clause on it, and it expired. And what they said is that the Attorney General of the United States can file an application with a special panel of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. There's a special panel for the appointment of special prosecutors, made up of, I think, 3 to 5 judges at any given time. So the U.S. Attorney or Attorney General can apply for a special prosecutor, but Congress can ask for a special prosecutor. They can file a request to the court for the appointment of a special prosecutor, and at that point, it'll be the court that makes the decision of whether it's going to do that. Technically, it makes a decision as to whether it's going to do that, even if the Attorney General asks them to do it. So there's some discretion there in that committee. There's another grounds for it. We did it, in fact, one time when we were doing the Greensboro case. The Ku Klux Klan and the American Nazi Party rolled up in front of this big demonstration back on November 7th of 1979. They rolled up in 10 carloads of people and gunned down these young kids that were demonstrating against the Klan and Nazis. Holding up photographs and looking around for them and shooting them in the head and killing them, all on videotape. And they were acquitted by an all-white jury. And we went to the Justice Department and met at that time with Drew Days III, who was the head of the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department, to try to get a special prosecutor appointed. Okay? And he said, well, we have to allow a local jury to decide whether or not they were going to convict these Ku Klux Klan people of murder because there were charges filed against them. And so they waited and waited on that. And what we did is then Ronald Reagan was elected, and we had a meeting with Drew Days after the election, and we said, we're concerned that the election now here in 1980, November of 1980, is going to result in a new set of people in the Justice Department, and that they're not going to want to prosecute these guys at all. And one of his assistants said, "Oh, look, I wouldn't say that, with the Nixon administration or the Reagan administration coming in, that you're going to find overt racism in the Justice Department." And Drew Days, the head of the Civil Rights Division, said, "Don't include me in on that comment." Okay? And it turns out he was right. But so what we did is we then filed a motion. We sent a letter to the Attorney General, Ed Meese. We sent in a letter to him, in that we demanded the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate the assassination of all these young kids, because we uncovered the fact that the FBI and the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division of the Treasury Department both had undercover guys inside the Klan and Nazis, and that they were the ones that instigated the attack against the kids. They did it because the ATF people suspected that they were in possession of automatic weapons that they had allegedly purchased from the 2506 Brigade out of Florida, this right-wing Cuban fascist group. And so that they said, they suspected that they had these automatic rifles. So they go in, and the FBI undercover guy, Eddie Dawson, and this other guy, Bernard Bekovich, they actually, in the meeting, started instigating the Klan and Nazis. They brought them together in a coalition they called the United Racist Front. And in the meeting, they were goading them into bringing guns to the demonstration against these people. And it turns out that we knew about it because they had body mics on Bekovich, and they had it recorded. And so we subpoenaed the recordings, and they said, it turns out that we didn't have any real recordings. because the batteries didn't work. And in fact, we called the two guys that sat out in the ATF squad car listening to it over the radio. So we know that it was working. And then the judge, then they said, oh, they've destroyed the tapes. And so it goes on and on. But the bottom line is that we asked Judge Gerhard Gesell to, after we sent the letter into Ed Meese and asked for him to appoint a special prosecutor, under the special prosecutor statute at that time, they said if 90 days passes after you've submitted a letter to the Attorney General asking him to ask for a special prosecutor to be appointed, if 90 days expires and they haven't given you a response, they shall then appoint a special prosecutor. So we had them dead to rights. And so we filed a motion in front of Judge Gesell, and Judge Gesell said basically like, oh, well, come on, guys, let's give him another chance, even though the statute says that. And he wrote an opinion ordering under a writ of mandate the Attorney General to make a decision as to whether he was or wasn't going to ask for a special prosecutor. And then to no one's surprise, Meese said, no, I've decided not to. I don't think there's adequate evidence for this, but there sure was. You know, so what I'm saying is that when you're at this early stage of your training as lawyers, okay, you've got to understand that if you're pushing these issues of really trying to take advantage of the laws, you know, in combat with this elite group of people that are running the country and the economy, you know, and the world, you know, you're going to find that when push comes to pull, they're going to not obey them. And they're appointing judges that aren't going to enforce them. But the fact is you can get something out of them because you shame them and you embarrass them, because you call them into a public forum. And as long as you can work with people that are in the media to come and cover it, you know, they're afraid that they're going to be exposed to even average people. And so that's how you have to work on these things. But that's what's happening right here, right in front of you. There's this entire political dance going on in Washington, D.C., and you got people all across the country basically tearing their hair out over this complete moron that's in the White House and are afraid that he's going to do something absolutely catastrophic, like send an entire battle group into the Persian Gulf, you know, and start fabricating information about Iran getting ready to launch invasions against people. You know, I mean, if 90% of the people in the country can't believe a thing the president says, how can anybody believe him when he starts making these kind of assertions and justifying ordering a full battle group into the Persian Gulf? That's the fundamental problem that we've got with this fellow being president, is that he is destroying the integrity and the credibility of the presidency of the United States. In that, you know, now I'm not a big fan of having the president have that kind of authority where he can launch military invasions of anybody anyhow, you know. So that's the flip side of this, is that there are some potential long-term gains that may well be realized by having Trump in for 2 years or 4 years, is that people realize that it's not wise to invest that kind of power in one individual person, because after all, you might get a lunatic in that office again. You know, so this is the situation that we're looking at, and that what I'm pointing out to you is that while one of the underlying crimes that we have to continue to look at in Volume 1, and the evidence to support it, is not only the collusion, the cooperation, the coordination, the solicitation that was going on the part of Trump and his campaign to Russia to intervene in the election. There is the second one, which is if you could show that kind of collusion, that there was a real agreement, and they're pretty close on finding that event where Manafort had the meeting with Kislyak, and it actually gave him the data about the polling from Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. You know, that kind of agreement that they ought to do something with this information is really close to that kind of an agreement, which even Mueller backed away from. But so the second thing that could be shown, in addition just to the collusion itself, if it could be shown that Russia actually used that specific data to penetrate the voting machines in Michigan, in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, and actually manipulated the vote in any way, okay, that's the kind of thing that could bring the house down on them, okay? But now what we've got so far is them sending in, I think there's a number here, but I think it's something like 10,000 emails that they sent in to those 3 states. Russia, GRU, sent in these fake emails, instigating people against each other, all on the side of benefiting Trump. Picking on people for racial reasons, exacerbating the class differences between the workers, the steel workers and mine workers and stuff in the elite, like in the Clinton campaign. So that there's a lot of evidence showing that there was a conscious response on the part of the Russian GRU to the very data that was given to them by Manafort as the chairman of the campaign to Kislyak. Okay, so that's a second thing that people want to stay focused on. And the third one is the one that we've talked about here, which is still in the offing, we're still looking at, is these secret conversations that were going on about the sale of the Russian gas and oil company. We've got all these people in that April 27th, 2016 meeting at the Mayflower Hotel, this VIP gathering of 24 people, and you look at the 24 people, and virtually all of them were involved in the sale of this, and that there's this secret group of people, this intertrust group there, that nobody knows who they are. And so that the reasonable suspicion is that it may well involve Trump himself, and it may well involve Putin. And one of the reasons why it may well involve them is because it turns out that it was Carter Page that apparently brokered the deal. And Carter Page was on Trump's National Security Advisory Committee. And he was the one going back and forth to Russia and briefing the National Security Advisory Team on their conversations with Russia. Okay, and he was meeting with the CEO of the Russian oil company. So I mean that there's all kinds of smoke around that third potential crime that is here. And so you ask yourself, well, why is it that they won't investigate that? Why is it that they're all backing away from that collectively? And one of the reasons for it is there's a fellow named Gary Sick. He was a young commander in the Navy. He worked on the National Security Council of President Jimmy Carter, and he was part of the team that worked on the negotiation to free the 52 hostages that had been taken by Iran back in the administration of Jimmy Carter. And he wrote a book called The October Surprise. And what he is asserting there is that, and I've mentioned it just in passing in some of the earlier lectures, is that in the 1980 election, presidential election and congressional election, not only did Theodore Shackley, who was the director of covert operations for the Central Intelligence Agency under George Bush Sr., not only did he choreograph a process by means of which they brought in millions of dollars in money that had been skimmed off the opium trade in Southeast Asia and deposited in the Nugan Bank in Australia, bring it in through these 2 South African banks and bring it into the United States and destroy Senator Frank Church, who was the chairman of the Church Committee, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence Abuse, that was viewed as an enemy of the CIA. And not only did they destroy the campaign of Dick Clark from Iowa, who had aggressively opposed CIA covert operations in Africa, but they also went after Birch Bayh in Indiana, who had been opposing CIA covert operations. and also Alan Cranston in California, and Senator McGovern in South Dakota. They brought in millions of dollars of drug money from the CIA to directly intervene in the American election, and George Bush himself, George H.W. Bush himself, and Bill Casey, the chairman of their campaign, the corollary to Manafort, actually went and met with the Hezbollah. They met with the Hezbollah in Spain, in Madrid, and they met in Paris with them twice. And they entered into an agreement to get the Hezbollah to refuse to release the American hostages to President Carter, so as they could argue in their campaign that Carter was weak and vacillating and ineffectual, and so that they could take over. And they promised that if in fact they would hold them until after the election, the Reagan-Bush administration would give them a much better deal, i.e. sell them weapons, even though they were labeled as a terrorist organization. So it was a straight up hostage swap for weapons. And this young guy, Gary Sick, who was part of that negotiating team, wrote a book about it called The October Surprise. And what he said in the closing chapter is he said, look, for those of us who have lived in Washington, D.C. for 20 years or more, we've become used to these political scandals. You know, a particular senator is found to be a womanizer. Another one is found to be an alcoholic, or he's been dipping into his campaign monies for personal use. And whenever one of those people get caught and exposed for this, we all rally around, including the media, and we celebrate how the system has ferreted them out, and we've succeeded in pushing them out of government. But there is another category of crime. And he says, this is a crime that shakes the very foundations of the confidence of the governed in their governors. And the governors will not allow that to be exposed. And so, ironically, the fundamental seriousness of the criminal act that one performs in an attempt to seize and gain political power in our democracy is inversely proportional to the willingness to expose it. Okay? And this is an extraordinary thing to say by a guy who was on the National Security Council close to Jimmy Carter, and Jimmy Carter himself won't say it. One of the best people that's ever been elected to the presidency, even if only temporarily, will not say it, because he doesn't want to undermine the confidence, the blind confidence of us as the governed in our governing class. And that's what you're dealing with here, okay? And so that this reticence to turn our attention to delving into this information about the obstruction about the collusion and the activities that were engaged in by Donald Trump and his campaign staff people and his National Security Advisory Committee people, in these three areas of the collusion, soliciting, cooperating, coordinating, and the actual direct potential involvement in swinging the vote for Trump in Wisconsin, in Michigan, and in Pennsylvania. The refusal to look into that. I mean, all we've seen is in volume 1, what the special prosecutor Mueller said is that question has been assigned to the FBI. That's all that it said. No one has asked, well, how are you doing on that investigation? What are you doing in that investigation? Nobody's talking with them about that. It's just they've cast it over the side of the boat, and it's just gone floating away somewhere. Okay? So this is why I want you, not wanted in the past tense, but want you still to read the summary of volume 1 to see what that evidence is that is there. I want you to stand by to do everything you can do to look into, all of us, what the results were of the giving of the data, the polling data, by Manafort to Kislyak, about Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania. What happened? What did they do? I want you to in fact, I want you to do this. I want you to look at the volume 1 again. Now, please do this for Thursday. I want you to look at volume 1, and I want you to take a look at what it says about what happened with regard to that kind of polling data. Okay? And I want you to take a look at what the results of the elections was with regard to those states, how surprising it was to everybody that the election went in the direction of Trump in those areas. Okay? And I want you to be able to answer some questions about it on Thursday. Okay? Because it's one of the 3 areas that we want to go drilling down on.
I'm just wondering, how important is the polling data, since most of it seemed like it turned out to be wrong?
Well, that was what was surprising about it. That's what I want you to find out about. Look at that data. See what the data was. What was it saying? And the bottom line, I'll give you a hint to start with, is that they were suggesting that the Trump campaign, had decided that if they could swing just 70,000 votes across this 3-state area, they could win the election. And so that what happened is almost immediately the GRU started pouring emails into that area that were having the effect of raising up the prospects of people voting for Trump and voting against Hillary Clinton. And yet, with that evidence directly in their face, there's no further investigation on the part of the special prosecutor of that. He just casts it over to the FBI to look into that. Okay? And so I want you to take a look at those things. So, and you can, there are all kinds of places on the that you can look it up. You can find, like, for example, you can find the statement of the former federal prosecutors. You can find it on the internet. You guys are living at a time when it's absolutely astonishing of what you can find. Just sitting down at your computer and spending a couple hours digging into this thing as investigators. Okay, and you got a whole set of things where you can find isolated out the whole 10 acts that were asserted inside volume 2 of what the obstruction was, so that you'll see that there are 10 of them there, and you'll notice that there's only 3 here in the letter that's being signed by the 459 prosecutors. And you say, well, how did that happen? Okay, and then you got all of this. There's whole other sections you can find on all of the links between the Trump campaign people, and Russians. It's all been synopsized for you, on the internet. You can find it, and it's got tons of sites like this, of all the newspaper articles and investigative reports and everything else about this. You can find it all. What I'm saying is that you guys ought to be running around with your hair on fire, over this thing. This is a guy that is ordering the increase in the mining of coal, an increase in the drilling for oil, in the sale of oil, in the burning of petroleum and fossil fuels, which is killing you guys. I plan to live probably about as long as you do, but I might not make it. So that we're going to have to turn this over to you guys here. In another 30 years, I'll be like 50 years old. So you can find the dossier. You can find the full. You guys can look at the dossier that they're all talking about. It's got all the details in here about it. So even if this is too heavy for you, you can find synopses of it. So I want you guys to climb on board this thing with us. You've got your paper that you're going to be doing that is due on the 16th. on May 16th, I want it to be about this. And I want it to be something more than just you regurgitating back to me things I've said to you. And you can say, oh, look, I get it. I'm assuming you get it. I'm assuming you get it, what I'm saying to you. But I want you guys to do some original research here, to find more stuff out, to express to me what your thoughts are about this, to tell me what you plan to do with you and your fellow students and stuff, and your fellow generational members, okay? Because what we're going to do is once we get to the spot where you're going to hand in your paper that's focused on the impeachment process that's going on in front of you, we're going to then turn on that date of the 16th, the day your paper is due, we're going to turn to trying to get a better, deeper understanding of what all the forces are that are at play here. I've hinted at some of this, but one of the things that you don't know right now is that what's going on here is a lot more than just the progressives in the Democratic Party threatening to take over control of the Democratic Party from the moderates. And there's a lot more going on than just the hardcore reactionaries in the Republican Party trying to take over the Republican Party from the conservatives. There's more things going on than that. There are other entire worldviews at play here, okay? And so that this discussion that's going to be going on during the course of this election campaign of, the moderates led by Joe Biden, and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and the others trying to castigate all of the candidates from your generation, as socialists. That's what they're going to do. That any effort to kind of regulate the oil industry and the fossil fuel industry and keep them from killing everybody in the world is being characterized as socialism. This is the same kind of thing that went on back between 1932 and 1934 when these same elements started pushing back against Franklin Roosevelt. When Franklin Roosevelt was trying to rein these people in, trying to get these corporations under control because they were killing everybody. They were killing the economy. They were killing people in the workplace, and they were fighting off any kind of rules and regulations governing the workplace, where people are getting their arms caught in machinery, with no safeguards on them. They have little kids, 7 to 8-year-old kids, were working, 18-hour days for 7 days a week in the mines, and every effort to try to regulate them through any kind of legislation, they would start screaming bloody murder and say, a corporation is a person, we have the same fundamental rights as anybody, and you're interfering in our right to contract with these 7-year-olds, And so that it took 2 years of that fight for Roosevelt to be able to get any of this stuff passed. Okay, so these I'm not asking you to go back and dig into the long historical history of all this kind of stuff. I'm going to be sharing with you some of it so that you have a proper perspective on it. But I'm just asking you to come forth, Lazarus. Just come forth. And dig in a little more with me on this stuff, okay? Because you guys are the ones that need to go out into the world talking to your friends and family and others to be able to communicate to them what a serious problem we've got here. And they're going to look to you and they're going to say, well, you're the smarty pants. You're the ones that are off in college now. What do you think we ought to do about this? And I want you to get to the point where you love having people ask you questions like that. Okay? Where you're going to go, oh goody, oh boy, I get to now hold forth. Okay? And explain to them what the kind of issues are that are at stake here, who the players are that are at this thing, what kind of advice we can make for them, what they can do about this. And you'll then be actually involved in saving the world. You happen to have been born at a particular time where that's a real issue here. We're talking about the potential destruction of the entire ecosystem of the planet right now. So that's what I'm doing up here in front of you. And so I want you guys to think creatively. I want you to ask me questions. I want you to, when you ask questions, we want to share those questions with everybody and start thinking about the paper that you're going to be writing about this. You know, I'm still shocked that's as short as it is. What is it, the next page, next paper?
7 pages, 7 to 8 pages, something like that.
7 or 8 pages. You know, I mean, it's a wonder that you can even clear your intellectual throat in 5 or 6 pages. You know, I mean, I want you guys to dig in on this, because this is the key pivot paper for this whole course, and we're gonna start dealing with the effects of the global climate change, how it relates to the indigenous people, because what you're going to discover here, I don't even want to get started on that yet, because I want you to stay focused on this impeachment. But I'll start talking with you about that as soon as you get your papers done. Have we done a prompt on the papers yet?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I want to look at that and see if I can make it harder for you guys, more exciting for you guys, okay?
I sent an email last week. You all should have gotten it. If you didn't, come and see me, so I can
Okay.
make sure I have your email.
But I want to get some creative ideas back from you guys, okay? That you know, rather than just looking at the prompt and trying to figure out what you can say about it, I want you to think creatively about what kind of issues that we have raised here so far are ones that you want to pursue in the paper. And so that we'll agree to do that. And then I can, perhaps John and I can point you at some additional reading. I mean, with the size of the articles and stuff that they have here, I mean, entire page after page of references right here of what they're talking about the impeachment. They've got tons of documents here. Look at Obama warned Trump against hiring Flynn, officials say. New York Times, May 24th of 2017. There's no doubt that the academic world and the world of the intelligentsia are trying to flood you with information that you've got access here to. So so I'd like, tell me what you're thinking here. Okay, what other questions have we got before we have to get out of here, when they're going to make you leave this class today? Okay?
I've got one question about the definition of collusion.
Yes.
In his summary, he said there isn't a definition of collusion, so that's what made him use conspiracy. I guess, like, also 2 questions. One would be, do you think, like, this further investigation would be able to gather the evidence necessary for conspiracy, or, I don't know how outlandish this is.
Yeah,
Is this an opportunity to, like, define collusion separately?
I think that there is every reason in the world to believe that a further investigation of the data that's in Volume 1 can actually establish this. In fact, it says there, in Volume 1, it says, we were obstructed in a number of ways, which we'll talk about in Volume 2. We were obstructed by people refusing to answer questions, saying they couldn't remember, they didn't give us the documents that we asked for, and therefore this could change our judgment about this. And he says that here in Volume 1. And so I want us to turn our attention to that and look at that and say, okay, what can we do to try to drill down on that? And there's all kinds of data around, and you got access to the internet to go digging and searching and investigating this. And so one of the things you might want to do with your paper is to find some additional information, such as we did about the sale of this Russian oil company. You know, find other things that may explain some of the remaining mysteries. And we've still got these 2 great big mysteries hanging in front of us here, is why in the world did Trump have this kind of relationship with Putin? What is the possible explanation for that? And the other one is, what is it that could possibly be the crime that is being covered up here and being obstructed that no one is talking about, if it isn't the collusion? Okay? So those are the kind of things I want you to look at. So it isn't just a matter of more clearly defining collusion, you know, because it's just a little lawyer's gimmick of, well, collusion isn't a real thing or isn't a real word, we have to do conspiracy. And therefore we got this burden of proving, you know, a corrupt intent and actual agreement and all that stuff. And the fact is that you may well find something, that we can then, run up the flagpole and give it to the New York Times, or, send it to Rachel or something, and get it revealed.
Can I make an argument that an inferential agreement exists with the secret or the VIP cocktail party that you started with? But where would you find out about something you just Google that VIP?
That's where you start. You start with that. Yeah, you start with that. Then you try to find out. You may see footnotes that there are books written about it. There's a whole book written about collusion. I can't remember what the name of it is right now, but I've got it somewhere. So there's lots of resources for you to dig into this thing. I want you to surprise yourself about how important your own work can be. You don't have to be at the PhD level, to be writing these masterful theses that change the whole world. You can start doing that as undergraduates. But you just have to devote the time and energy to it. Okay? All right. Okay, kids, let's do it. I'll see you on Thursday at 3:20. Okay?